Here is part 1 written in simple English, natural tone, and human-centric storytelling. No headings or restricted names are used. The community center was brighter than usual that weekend afternoon. Sunlight slipped through the big windows, landing in soft patches across the floor where children played and adults talked in small groups. It was the kind of place people visited without dressing up or planning too much. Everyone knew everyone, and the atmosphere was warm, familiar. And a little noisy dot near the back of the hall, a quiet girl, sat with her mother. She wasn't the type who liked drawing attention to herself. She stayed close to her mother's side, listening more than she spoke, taking in the voices and laughter around her. The old upright piano on the small stage stood untouched, collecting dust the way it always did. Most people passed by it without even noticing. A few adults gathered near the front, pointing at the piano while chatting among themselves. One of them laughed and said someone should play something simple to cheer up the room. It wasn't a serious suggestion. It was more like a casual remark, tossed out to fill a pause in conversation. Another person joked that even a child could sit there and play a little tune, just a basic melody everyone knew. Their eyes drifted around the room, and eventually someone glanced toward the girl at the back. She looked gentle, harmless, someone who wouldn't refuse if she was asked politely. One of the adults raised their hand and pointed at her with a friendly smile. "Why don't you give it a try?" They called out across the room. Just something small. Anything at all. The girl blinked, unsure if they were truly talking to her. Her mother gave her a soft nudge and whispered that it was okay, that she didn't have to if she didn't want to. But the girl didn't want to seem rude, and everyone was already looking at her with harmless, relaxed expressions. They weren't expecting anything special. They didn't seem demanding or strict. It felt more like a playful invitation. Her heart thumped a little faster as she stood up. She wasn't used to walking across a room full of people. Every step felt louder than it really was. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and moved slowly toward the stage, trying not to trip or make herself look awkward. People smiled at her as she passed. Some stepped aside to give her space. The room wasn't silent, but the conversations dipped to softer levels as more heads turned to watch her. They thought she might sit there and press a few random keys or attempt a short, shaky melody. Something cute or basic, nothing more. The girl didn't look like someone preparing to surprise anyone. Her steps were small, her shoulders slightly curled inward. She climbed the 2 wooden steps to the stage, her shoes making a soft tapping sound. When she reached the bench, she paused for a moment. The piano looked older up close, its wood slightly worn, and the keys quietly waiting. She pulled the bench back and sat down with a nervous breath. Her feet barely touched the floor comfortably, so she shifted forward a little. The audience wasn't fully focused on her yet. Many still whispered to one another, expecting this to be over in seconds. The girl placed her hands on her lap at first. Then, slowly, she lifted them and let her fingers hover above the keys. She pressed one key gently, testing the sound. It echoed softly, not too sharp, not too dull. She pressed another, then a third, almost like she was making sure the piano was alive. People close to the stage heard the faint notes and smiled, assuming she was simply figuring out where to begin. There was no sign that she had anything big planned. Her posture looked shy, a little unsure, and it made everyone expect nothing more than a simple tune. Her mother watched from the back, hands clasped, a mix of pride and worry written on her face. She knew her daughter didn't enjoy being the center of attention, and she wondered if she had pushed her too gently. But the girl didn't turn back. She focused on the keys as though the rest of the room had vanished. More people fell quiet, curious to see what she would do. A boy near the front sat cross-legged on the floor, chin resting on his palms. Another child tugged at a parent's sleeve, whispering that they wanted to be closer to see better. The adults chuckled quietly at the innocent eagerness. One of the older men folded his arms and leaned back in his chair, waiting with a friendly grin. "She's brave for even trying," he said to the person beside him. Most kids would run off. The girl let out a slow breath, and her shoulders relaxed a little. She placed both hands fully on the keys this time, her fingers spread lightly. Her legs stopped trembling, and she seemed to sink into a place of calm. The people didn't know it, but this was the moment she always experienced before she played. The steady breath, the focus, the brief silence inside her mind. She pressed a soft chord, letting the sound stretch across the room. A few people turned fully toward the stage now, noticing the difference in her touch. It didn't sound like a random test. It sounded deliberate, smooth, controlled, but the rest of the audience still didn't understand what they were about to witness. Some continued their conversations, speaking in quiet tones so they wouldn't distract her. Others leaned against the walls, half paying attention, waiting for the little performance to begin and end. The girl didn't rush. She took a moment to settle her breathing again and adjust the bench by pulling it slightly closer. She placed her feet properly on the floor, grounding herself. Her fingers returned to the keys with a sense of purpose she didn't show on her face. Then, slowly, the quiet room grew even softer, as though the air itself leaned in to listen. Her first real notes were gentle, almost whispered. They slipped into the room without asking for attention, but they carried a tone that didn't match what people expected. A few heads lifted. The conversations dropped even further. Someone near the back frowned slightly and smiled surprised. Another person tilted their head, noticing the flow of the melody beginning to form. It didn't sound like a random mix of notes. It wasn't a beginner's hesitation. It had shape. The girl's fingers moved from one key to another with a quiet confidence she hadn't shown when she walked up. She didn't look around. She didn't check the audience. She only watched the keys and let her hands guide her. Her breathing calmed, matching the rising rhythm. A soft murmur spread through the crowd as more people realized something unexpected was happening. The children in front went still, sensing the shift even before the adults did. The old man who had joked earlier dropped his smile and leaned forward. The girl continued to play, letting the music form piece by piece, each note connecting to the next with a smoothness no one saw coming at that moment. The room wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, wasn't distracted. It was waiting. It was leaning. Closer. It was slowly beginning to understand that the quiet girl who was asked to play a simple tune wasn't just going to press a few keys. She was about to reveal something much more. The room had settled into a soft, curious silence as the girl sat at the piano. At first, the notes she played were gentle, almost like she was testing the air. But each second drew more attention. Bit by bit, conversations faded. People leaned forward slightly, unsure of what they were hearing, but aware that something different was beginning to unfold. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting her fingers explore them with delicate movements. Her shoulders were still low, as if she wanted to stay invisible, but her hands showed a confidence that didn't match the quiet way she carried herself. A soft melody unfolded, slow but sure, like a calm stream finding its path. A young child sitting cross-legged near the stage tilted their head, trying to understand how someone so shy could produce sounds that felt so warm and steady. There. Parent placed a gentle hand on their shoulder, signaling them to stay quiet and listen. The little one nodded without looking away from the girl. The girl shifted her hands slightly, and the tone changed, growing smoother. Her fingers moved with a slow rhythm at first, but even those first movements carried something gentle and thoughtful. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply let the music flow the way it felt right inside her. A few adults exchanged small glances, surprised by the softness and control in the notes. They had expected something simple, maybe a basic melody everyone knew. But this didn't feel like that. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had emotion in it, a quiet, steady emotion that made people pause. One of the older women near the front straightened in her seat. She had heard many children try their hand at the piano before, usually with shaky fingers or quick, uncertain taps on the keys. But this girl seemed different. Her touch wasn't hesitant. It was careful, thoughtful, and strangely sure. The girl pressed a series of notes that climbed slowly upward, forming a small shape of melody that lingered in the air before drifting away. Her fingers glided, barely lifting as they moved from one key to the next. Her breathing deepened, more even now, like she was falling into a familiar space, a place she understood better than the crowded room around her mother watched from the back, hands still clasped together, eyes wide with quiet pride. She had seen her daughter play many times at home, on the old keyboard that sometimes skipped notes or played uneven sounds. But here, on this piano, the girl sounded different, more alive, more open, more like herself. A group of teenagers who had been joking loudly earlier now stood with their arms crossed, not out of annoyance, but interest. Their laughter had faded the moment the melody began to take shape. None of them expected to admire anything happening on that stage, but their expressions softened as each note floated across the hall. The girl adjusted her posture, pulling the bench a tiny bit forward. She placed her fingers down again, and this time the melody grew stronger, still gentle, but fuller, with smoother edges and deeper tones. Her left hand joined in, adding a soft foundation beneath the right hand's wandering tune. It felt like a conversation between the keys, quiet yet meaningful. People close to the stage exchanged small smiles. Something about the way she played made them feel calmer, like the music was smoothing out the noise in their minds. A little girl who had been running around minutes earlier now stood still beside her mother, eyes wide and shining. The older man who had earlier joked about someone playing a simple tune leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. He wasn't smiling now. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and his mouth parted just a little. His friend beside him whispered, "She's good," and he nodded slowly, still watching. The girl continued, her fingers moving faster now, but still with intention. The melody shifted from soft to steady, building lightly. The change wasn't dramatic. It didn't shock the room, but it pulled people even deeper into the moment. Her movements had grown more confident since the first few notes. She no longer looked tense. Her shoulders loosened, her back straightened, and her hands flowed in smooth arcs across the keys. Someone near the back whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" But no one had an answer. Most people in the room barely knew her. They had seen her a few times at community events, always quiet, always staying close to her mother. They had never imagined she carried something like this inside her. The girl pressed a series of soft chords that blended beautifully, creating a wave of sound that felt warm and comforting. A woman closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gentle rise and fall of the notes wash over her. It reminded her of the kind of music she played at home, during peaceful evenings, a sound that carried both calmness and meaning. The children in the room stayed unusually still, their eyes drawn to her hands. They didn't understand the skill behind what she was doing, but they felt the peace in the sound. It held their attention in a way no loud performance could. The girl's expression softened as she played. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not wide, but peaceful. It was the kind of smile that came naturally when someone was doing something they loved. Her body language had changed entirely from the moment she first walked up. She wasn't shrinking into herself anymore. She was present, steady, and connected to the music. She started shifting between higher and lower notes, weaving them together in small patterns. Each change felt intentional, like she was guiding the music somewhere only she understood. And yet everyone in the room followed, even if they didn't know where it was leading. A man standing near the door lowered his phone, no longer checking messages. He watched quietly, eyebrows raised, surprised he had stopped what he was doing without even thinking about it. The music had caught him before he realized that her mother wiped at the corner of her eye. She could feel something shifting in the room, something small but meaningful. People who had never looked at her daughter twice were now paying full attention, drawn in by the gentle strength in her playing. The girl's fingers moved in a slow circle of notes that spiraled gently upward. It felt like watching something unfold petal by petal. People leaned in a little more, feeling the melody settle deeper into the room. The girl didn't think about the audience. She didn't think about the request that had pushed her onto the stage. She thought only about the keys beneath her fingers, the smooth surface, the slight vibrations, the way each sound blended into the next. The music had taken her somewhere quiet and familiar, a place where she didn't feel shy or small. Suddenly, she paused, not a long pause, just a tiny breath between phrases. The break made the room freeze, waiting. Even the children held their breath for a moment. Then her fingers moved again, and the melody returned, different this time. It was warmer, smoother, as though she had found the heart of the piece she wanted to play. The notes flowed with more emotion now, rising and falling like waves. People felt the shift, felt the meaning behind it. The older man finally whispered, "This isn't just a simple tune." Someone else murmured, "She's really talented." But the girl didn't hear them. She was lost in the sound, letting it guide her. Her hands danced lightly across the piano, the soft glow of the afternoon sun catching the movements, making them look almost weightless. The music filled the space, reaching corners of the hall that had been quiet for years. People didn't move. No one shuffled their feet. No one checked their phone. The room had become still, content to stay in the moment, waiting for whatever came next. The simple request that started everything had been forgotten. No one remembered the casual suggestion or the jokes. No one thought about the shy girl who had walked up so quietly. They only saw the hands moving across the keys. They only heard the music. And though they didn't yet know it, they were hearing the beginning of something far more powerful than a simple tune. The girl's fingers moved with a new confidence as the melody grew fuller, rising like a soft breeze, turning into a steady wind. People in the room felt the change before they understood it. The earlier gentle notes had opened the door, but now something bigger was unfolding, something deeper, something that made the entire hall lean in without meaning to. Her hands swept from one end of the piano to the other with smooth motions, almost like she was painting with sound. Each note blended into the next, forming a melody that carried emotion, real emotion, the kind that made hearts slow down and thoughts quiet down. Her face stayed calm, but her body moved with the rhythm. Small motions, natural and soft, showing how connected she was to the music. Group of older women seated near the front exchanged looks filled with surprise. They had come expecting a simple performance, nothing more than a quick tune to entertain the children. But now their faces held awe, the kind people wear when they witness something rare. The girl didn't look at the audience. She didn't need to. Her world had shrunk to the piano keys, black and white, soft and firm under her fingertips. She could feel the small vibrations of each note through her hands, through her arms, through her chest. It grounded her, like the music was holding her steady. A man standing against the wall folded his arms, not out of impatience, but to steady himself. He hadn't expected to feel much of anything when he arrived that day. He came to drop off his nephew, thinking he would wait a few minutes and then leave. But now he didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on her hands as they moved in a graceful pattern, The girl shifted into a richer chord, one that echoed through the hall in a warm wave. A soft gasp escaped someone near the back. Another person whispered, "This is beautiful." But no one responded, not because they disagreed, but because they didn't want to break the moment. The room had gone completely still. Even the small children, who normally couldn't sit still for long, remained quiet. One child sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, watching the girl's hands like they were performing magic. A middle-aged woman who worked at the community center slowly lowered the stack of papers she had been holding. They slipped onto the table beside her unnoticed. She had heard many performances in that hall over the years, but none had ever made her stop working. Now she stood frozen, listening, feeling something she couldn't name. The girl played a series of notes that rose gently, like tiny steps climbing into the air. Then they fell again, drifting downward softly, like leaves moving in the wind. The pattern repeated, each time sounding a little different, a little more emotional, a little more alive. Her breathing matched the music now. When the melody rose, her chest lifted. When it softened, her shoulders relaxed. The piano wasn't just an instrument in that moment. It was part of her, answering her hands like it had been waiting for her touch. The older man in the second row rubbed his chin, stunned. He had lived a long life and heard many talented musicians, but something about this quiet girl was different. Maybe it was the honesty in her playing, the purity of it. She wasn't trying to show off. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply letting her heart speak through the keys. A young teen who had been leaning against the wall earlier now stood upright, arms dropped by their sides. The music tugged at something inside them, something they hadn't felt in a long time. They whispered to their friend, "I didn't expect this," but their friend didn't reply. They were just as entranced. The girl's fingers moved faster now, creating a light ripple across the keys. It wasn't rushed or messy. It was smooth, beautifully smooth, like watching water flow over stones without breaking. She added small flourishes, subtle touches that only someone who truly understood the piano could create. Her mother pressed both hands over her heart. She recognized the shift in the music. She had heard her daughter play like this only at home, late at night, when she thought no one was listening. It was the kind of playing she did when she wanted to express something words couldn't hold. A soft hum of air moved through the room as someone opened the side door. But even that small sound felt like an interruption. The person who opened it quickly closed it again, not wanting to disturb the moment. A group of kids who had been drawing at a table now abandoned their crayons. They stood behind their chairs, resting their chins on the backs, watching the girl with expressions of pure wonder. They didn't know much about music, but they knew something special was happening. The girl shifted into a more emotional section of the melody. Her hands moved with fuller motion, lifting and falling with intention. The music deepened, becoming richer, filling the space like warm light. The audience felt it not just in their ears, but in their chests. Like each note carried a small heartbeat. A few people blinked rapidly, surprised at the sudden sting of tears in their eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was something gentler, something like admiration mixed with awe. The girl's body moved with the rhythm now. Her head tilted slightly. Her shoulders swayed with grace. It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It was natural, like the music was flowing through her. Somewhere near the back of the room, a teenager recorded a short clip on their phone, not to show off or post online, but because they wanted to remember this moment. They wanted to hear it again later, in the quiet of their room, where they could close their eyes and feel the music all over. The girl transitioned into a brighter set of notes, almost playful, but still with depth. The shift made a few people smile softly, the way someone smiles when they hear a memory they had forgotten. The music danced lightly for a few moments, like sunlight flickering through leaves. Her fingers moved quicker than before, but the sound remained clean, controlled. Full of emotion, the older woman in the front row wiped her eyes with a small tissue, embarrassed but unable to stop the tears. The music reminded her of a time long ago when her own mother played piano in their small home. The memory was warm, bittersweet, and the girl's playing had brought it back with such clarity that she felt it all over again. The melody grew fuller once more, rising with strength. It wasn't loud, just confident. A quiet strength, the kind that comes from someone who has practiced alone for years without applause or recognition. The girl added a soft but steady rhythm with her left hand, while her right continued the flowing melody. It created a rich layer of sound that filled the hall completely. A man near the door whispered, "She plays like she's telling a story." Someone next to him nodded slowly. The girl herself didn't think of it that way. She didn't think of her music as a performance. To her, the piano was a friend, one that understood her without needing explanations. Her fingers pressed into a deeper chord that echoed like a gentle sigh. Then she lifted her hands briefly, letting the room hang in silence. The pause felt intentional, like a breath before the next thought. People didn't move. They didn't whisper. They didn't even shift in their chairs. The girl placed her hands back on the keys and resumed with even more emotion. The notes rose again, swirling together with a sense of freedom and honesty. It felt like the melody was carrying the room upward, lifting everyone's spirits in a slow, gentle arc. Her mother felt tears roll down her cheeks again, but she didn't wipe them this time. She let them fall, grateful to see her daughter's gift finally shining in a place where others could see it. The music reached a stretch where it seemed to bloom delicate at first, then stronger, then beautifully bright. People felt their hearts tighten, then soften as the sound washed over them. The girl closed her eyes for a few seconds, letting her hands move on instinct. She didn't need to see the keys. She knew them. She had studied them for years in the quiet of her home. When no one else was awake, the melody steadied once more, returning to a softer, warmer tone. It felt like someone comforting a friend, a sound that eased the room into calmness again. The audience breathed together, as if the entire room shared one gentle breath. Her fingers slowed slightly, still graceful, still steady. The music softened like the ending of a long, heartfelt conversation. The girl pressed a few final notes, soft, delicate, lingering. Then she lifted her hands. Silence filled the room. It wasn't empty silence. It was full of emotion, full of awe, full of understanding. People stared, stunned by what they had just heard. They had asked her to play a simple tune, but she had given them a masterpiece. The final notes faded into the air, leaving a silence that was almost impossible to break. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was full of something heavier, something deeper than anyone expected. People didn't know how to react at first. They simply sat, frozen, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The girl remained seated, her hands hovering just above the keys for a moment, as if she were savoring the last sounds herself. Her chest rose and fell steadily, the deep breathing that had carried her through the performance now slowly returning to normal. She felt a light tremble in her fingers, tiny but noticeable, the only sign of the effort it had taken to pour herself into the music. Around the room, people were stunned. A few shifted in their seats, almost involuntarily, glancing at each other as if to make sure they had heard correctly. The shy girl, who had been asked to play a simple tune, had transformed the small community center into a space filled with beauty, emotion, and grace. No one had expected this. The younger children, who had been quiet throughout, now clapped softly, unsure of the proper way to show their awe. One small boy whispered, "She's amazing," and his sister repeated it, louder this time. The words spread quietly, as if the room needed to confirm the truth slowly. A few adults stood first, realizing that the silence had gone on long enough. They clapped hesitantly at first, their hands unsure how to begin expressing their admiration. Then the sound built, louder and more confident, until the entire room was clapping and cheering. The girl looked up for the first time, her eyes scanning the audience. She saw smiles, wide eyes, tears glimmering on a few cheeks, and heads nodding in appreciation. It was a different reaction than she had ever received for her music. At home, she had practiced for hours in solitude, sometimes crying quietly because she couldn't reach the sound she imagined in her mind. Now, for the first time, people were seeing it, hearing it, and recognizing it. Her mother's hands flew to her face as she could barely breathe for excitement and pride. She had always known her daughter had something special. She had seen the way she could make music come alive even on a simple keyboard, but she never expected the world around them to witness it like this. Some people moved closer, hesitant but eager. A woman with kind eyes approached, clapping slowly, then leaning in to whisper. That was incredible. Do you take lessons? The girl shook her head softly, surprised by the attention and unsure how to respond. Her hands still rested on the keys, though they were no longer playing. A man standing near the back raised his hands in applause again, exclaiming quietly, I've never heard anything like that in my life. Another person nodded, tears forming in the corners of their eyes. A few children began whispering to each other, pretending not to cry, but unable to hide their wonder. The hall felt full, not just with sound anymore, but with feeling. The girl rose from the bench slowly. She wasn't used to standing in front of so many people who were all looking at her with admiration instead of casual curiosity. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and joy. She had given herself completely to the piano, but now the audience's attention made her nervous. A group of adults, including the one who had jokingly asked her to play, approached her hesitantly. They wanted to congratulate her, but didn't want to overwhelm her. They spoke softly, saying things like, You have real talent, and we were all amazed by what you just did. The words were sincere, but gentle, careful not to scare or pressure her. She nodded, offering a small smile, still processing what had happened herself. She had expected a few polite claps, maybe some encouraging words from her mother. She had not expected a full hall of people, captivated and moved by the music she had created. Some of the children edged closer, shyly holding out their hands for high fives or hugs. She gave them a quiet nod, a little wave, keeping her focus steady on acknowledging them without feeling overwhelmed. She wanted to respond, wanted to share her happiness, but the rush of emotion was almost too much. The applause continued, filling the room like a gentle wave. People were clapping for her not because they had to, not because she had followed instructions, but because what they had heard went beyond anything they could have imagined. It was raw, authentic, human. They didn't need to understand every technical aspect. They felt it. They understood it in their hearts. Her mother finally moved forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter in a tight embrace. You did it, she whispered. You played beautifully. Everyone heard it. They felt it. The girl nodded into her mother's shoulder, tears pricking her eyes. She felt relief, pride, and joy all at once. The fear that had gripped her when she first walked onto the stage had dissolved completely. The older man, who had been skeptical at first, now stood with his hat in hand. He shook his head slowly and muttered, I didn't think anyone could play like that here. I was wrong. A few others nodded in agreement, humbled by what they had just experienced. Some people began asking questions about where she had learned to play. Others wanted to know if she had performed publicly before. She explained softly, almost whispering, that she had learned mostly at home, practicing for years on a small, old keyboard. The room reacted with quiet admiration. No one judged, no one questioned. They simply marveled at the dedication it had taken to create such music from such humble beginnings. The girl allowed herself to relax completely now. She stepped off the bench, feeling the boards under her feet, feeling the warmth of the room, feeling the presence of every single person who had just witnessed her talent. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. The shy, quiet girl had walked up to play a simple tune, and now she stood at the center of attention, not for the sake of attention, but because of the gift she had shared. Some people lingered, wanting to speak to her, to ask for an autograph, or just to share their appreciation. She smiled softly at each person, grateful, but still a little unsure how to handle the flood of attention. The children surrounded her, eyes wide, asking questions, wanting to hear her play again. She laughed quietly, a sound that blended with the gentle hum of the audience's conversation, as the tension of awe slowly melted into excitement and curiosity. The atmosphere shifted, becoming warm and personal. People who had been strangers moments before now felt connected to her, connected through the music that had filled the hall. It was a human moment, shared quietly but powerfully, a memory everyone would carry. The girl finally allowed herself a deep breath, feeling light, unburdened, and happy. She had faced the expectation of a simple tune and had gone beyond, creating something that had touched hearts. It wasn't just a performance. It was an experience, one that would remain in the room long after the notes had stopped. Her mother guided her toward the door as people continued to talk softly among themselves, still in awe. The girl glanced back at the piano, a quiet smile on her face. She knew she would remember this moment forever, the moment she transformed a simple request into something unforgettable. The girl walked out of the hall with her mother beside her, the warm afternoon sun casting soft light over their path. People were still talking softly behind them, but the girl felt a strange calm inside her. The applause, the whispers of admiration, the looks of all of that felt like it belonged somewhere else. What mattered to her was the music she had created and how it had connected to everyone in the room. She didn't feel proud in a showy way. She felt a quiet happiness, the kind that comes when you have shared something deeply personal and it is understood. She had poured herself into the piano, and the world had noticed without her needing to ask. It was a humbling, beautiful experience. Her mother held her hand tightly, and they walked toward the parking lot, the sounds of the hall fading behind them. Cars idled quietly. People were gathering their things, but the girl hardly noticed. Her mind was replaying the melody, the way it had moved across the hall, the way it had touched faces she would never forget. Every note felt alive, like a small piece of herself had been released into the world. People really liked it, her mother said softly, glancing at her. They've never seen anything like that before. The girl nodded, still quiet. She was used to practicing alone, where applause and praise were rare, where she only measured herself against her own standards. But today, something had shifted. She had been recognized in a way that didn't feel forced or fake. The music had done the speaking, and it had spoken well. A few people approached her as she moved toward the car. One of the older women from the front row offered to help her practice more formally, saying she had connections with a local music teacher who could guide her. Another person suggested she record her music, noting how beautiful it would sound captured properly. The girl listened quietly, unsure at first how to respond to the sudden attention, but inside her chest, a small spark of excitement was kindling. The community center itself had shifted slightly because of her performance. People who had arrived expecting a casual afternoon left with something more. Conversations carried her music in them, as they described to one another how a quiet girl had played like she was born to do it, like the piano had been waiting just for her touch. A young neighbor approached, clutching a small notebook. "Could you teach me?" the child asked timidly. The girl smiled gently, touched by the request, and nodded. She realized that her music could now inspire others, could reach even the youngest in the room. And that feeling warmed her heart in a new way. Her mother guided her to the car, opening the door and helping her settle inside. As they drove home, the girl looked out the window, thinking about what had happened. She didn't imagine fame or awards. What she imagined now was something quieter, the ability to continue playing, to continue sharing what she loved, and maybe, just maybe, to help others find joy in music too. At home, the piano in the corner of the living room looked familiar, comforting. She walked over and pressed her hands lightly to the keys, remembering the sound of the hall, the resonance of the notes, the reactions of the people. She felt a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She had played her heart, and it had been received fully and beautifully. Her mother stayed nearby, watching her play a few small notes, smiling with pride. She didn't need to say anything. The girl's hands moved with calm assurance, each note carrying the memory of the performance earlier that day. Over the next few days, the memory of the hall stayed with her. Neighbors and friends who had attended kept asking her to play again. Some called to hear her record, some wanted lessons, others simply wanted to see her perform once more. And while she was still quiet and humble, she began to understand that her talent could open doors, could bring joy to others, and could touch hearts in ways words never could. She began practicing with new purpose, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wanted to see how far she could take the music that had always lived quietly inside her. She wanted to understand it better, to explore it more fully, to grow. She knew now that music wasn't just a private thing anymore. It could be shared, and when it was, it had power. Her mother helped her set aside a small corner of the living room just for practice, arranging the piano and a few chairs so she could play for small audiences at home. Sometimes it was only family. Sometimes a neighbor or friend would come by. Each time, the girl felt a little more at ease. She was learning how to share her gift without fear, how to let the music speak instead of worrying about attention or judgment. One afternoon, a local music teacher who had heard about her performance at the community center came to visit. They sat down together at the piano, and the girl played a few pieces she knew. The teacher listened, eyes wide with admiration, occasionally nodding. Then they offered guidance, small tips, encouragement, and a plan for lessons that would help her refine her technique and expressiveness even more. The girl felt excitement and nervousness at the same time. She was learning that her talent, which had always felt like a private secret, could now grow into something larger. But the thought didn't scare her. She felt ready. She knew she had a foundation strong enough to handle guidance and instruction, to explore music fully, and to discover what she could truly do. News of her talent spread slowly through the community. People began to talk about the girl who had taken a simple request and turned it into a performance that touched everyone. Her story was shared quietly at first, then more widely, with neighbors and friends bringing new listeners to her music. She became a small local inspiration, not for fame, but for the power of practice, passion, and the courage to share something personal. Through it all, the girl remained humble. She didn't seek attention or recognition. She simply played, each note a reflection of who she was and how deeply she loved music. And as she continued to practice, continued to perform in small ways, she realized that what mattered most was not the applause or the admiration. It was the connection, the ability to reach hearts, to make someone stop and feel, to show that even quiet people have voices that matter, even if they are spoken through a piano. Months later, she would return to that community center to play again. She walked on stage with confidence, not arrogance, not showmanship, but with the calm knowledge that her music had a power of its own. People waited eagerly, remembering the first time, wondering what she would play now. And when she began, the notes poured out naturally, effortlessly. Every hand movement, every chord, every gentle pause carried the warmth and emotion of someone who had discovered her voice and decided to share it with the world. People listened, hearts lifted, eyes wide, some even moved to tears. It was a moment of connection, the kind that doesn't come often, but when it does, stays forever. Her life began to shift subtly after that. Opportunities came: small performances at schools, community events, and local gatherings. Each time she played, she remembered that first hall, that first time she had been asked to play something simple, and she realized that her courage, her patience, and her love for music had created more than just notes on a piano. It had created a bridge between her heart and the hearts of everyone listening. Through every performance, she never forgot the quiet girl who had walked to the piano nervously for the first time. She held on to that humility, that softness, that awareness that the true magic of music comes not from showing off, but from sharing honestly and fully. She had learned that talent alone is not enough. It is the willingness to share it, to risk being seen, to trust the music and trust yourself. That makes it real. And so, the girl who had been asked to play a simple tune became a symbol of quiet brilliance in her community. Her journey was just beginning, but the lessons of that first day, the courage, the focus, the beauty of sharing something deeply personal, would stay with her forever. She continued to play, to grow, to touch hearts, knowing that the piano was not just an instrument, but a part of her soul, ready to speak whenever she allowed it to.